This whole Freudian notion that, childhood attachment styles map onto adult attachment styles, that's real. That's physiological.
In this enlightening video by Andrew Huberman, he delves into the intricate workings of the neuroscience of heartbreak. It's intriguing to learn that heartbreak transcends emotional pain and manifests as a physical injury within our brains. Andrew Huberman reveals that the very same areas in our brain that respond to physical pain are activated during heartbreak. This realization adds depth to our understanding of the profound anguish experienced during this challenging time. When
there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. The relationship represents the whole future. They have no concept that they know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down.
Andrew Huberman's insightful exploration of the neuroscience of heartbreak sheds light on the profound impact that it has on our brain chemistry. He explains that heartbreak can induce changes in our neurotransmitters, including dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. These crucial chemicals, responsible for regulating our mood, motivation, and pleasure, can decrease during heartbreak. This revelation helps explain why individuals often struggle with feelings of sadness and a lack of enthusiasm during this difficult period. However, it's important to remember that this knowledge represents merely the first couple of steps towards comprehending the complexity of heartbreak.
The better that we can lean into the emotional states that we fear the most, the better. There's the so-called secure attached style. This typically emerges in childhood when there's a very predictable caregiver-caree relationship between child and most often mother, but it can be father too or other caregiver. Just so happens that the classic experiments were done on mothers because this was in the 1970s and there weren't as many reverse role, homes, etc. There were some, but not as many as there are now. So that's one style of attachment. The parent leaves, the child gets a little distraught, but then can distract itself doing other things or just simply do other things because they have a high degree of intrinsic knowledge, not the thought, but intrinsic calm. The autonomic nervous system doesn't feel any need to ramp up because the mom returns. Then there's the so-called insecure attachment styles, and there are a bunch of different ones, but those are the ones where it's really stressful when the parent leaves. It's not clear they're going to come back, and when they come back, it's not clear that they're going to reestablish the bond, the child will feel supported, etc. Here's what's fascinating. Those same neural circuits are repurposed for romantic attachment in adult life. The same circuits, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, why would the brain throw away valuable circuitry? But this whole Freudian notion that, childhood attachment styles map onto adult attachment styles, that's real. That's physiological. Now, one important point, it's not one for one in the sense that, let's say you had a secure attachment to your father. Let's say it's a young girl, and as a baby and a young child, she had a secure attachment to her father and an insecure attachment to her mother. In adulthood, and let's say she's heterosexual, so in adulthood, she prefers men as romantic partners. This girl grows up, and you might say, well, she had a good relationship to her dad, so she's going to have a good secure attachment style in her adult heterosexual relationships. Often it's not the case. They will transplant or superimpose the insecure attachment style to the mother onto male relationships, but have great relationships to female friends, for instance. So we have to be a little careful to not map one for one. That's important.
In his thought-provoking video, Andrew Huberman highlights the behavioral changes that accompany heartbreak. He emphasizes that heartbreak can disrupt various aspects of our behavior, like sleep patterns, appetite, energy levels. Additionally, heartbreak can influence our social interactions, often leading individuals to kind of withdraw from their social circles, at least the ones that they usually associate with. Recognizing these behavioral alterations allows us to better understand the challenges that we face during heartbreak. It also encourages us to seek support and adopt coping strategies that align with these changes.
So all of that is in us. And then you were talking about breakups, and we did an episode on grief. And the way that grief works in the brain and nervous system is that there are three sort of factors that are mapped in our consciousness and our subconscious. And these are space, time, and this notion of closeness, which is attachment. Space and time is very simple. It's where is the person that I love and when will I see them next? Right? I mean, if you have a relative that lives overseas and you know they're alive, you're not going to grieve them. You might really miss them, but you're not going to grieve them the same way you would if suddenly you get the note, unfortunately, that they passed away. And then attachment is how close you are to them, like how critically you rely on them for internal control and support. And that doesn't mean they have to be an immediate caregiver. It could just be a really good friend that just your knowledge of him just makes you feel good. You feel better in the world. As a guy who mostly grew up with kind of a big pack of male friends. I mean, I feel strongest and happiest and most secure in life when I see something about one of my friends doing well in life. It just makes me feel good. If one of them dies, and unfortunately I'm getting to the age where a number of them have died, then you feel like all of a sudden, like, goodness, like there's a loss internally, right? Okay, that's all sort of obvious. But what's interesting is that the grief process itself is about restructuring this map. Think of it like a tripod. It's got three pieces: space, time, and closeness. When someone dies, it's very confusing for the brain, because where are they in space? Well, the body is put someplace. Maybe it's cremated, maybe it's not. We have notions of a spirit, and that depends on one's orientation, a soul or a spirit, okay? Or if you don't, then you don't, then where do they go, right? And then time, when will you see them again? The never. You'll never see them again. And the closeness component remains. And so there's an untethering of this map. And so there's been brain imaging studies showing that if you look in the brain in people that are in grief from loss of a really strong attachment, the state of brain and body that gets flipped on is a motivational state. It's exactly the same circuitry in the brain that one sees active if someone very hungry is put just outside the wall of some delicious food, or if an animal that really wants to mate is put just beyond the wall of that animal, but they can smell them. I mean, these are highly motivated, desiring states. So grief is a motivated state to bridge the distance in time and space, and yet it's impossible. And so the process of grief is a gradual waning of that motivation and a gradual shift of the memory of the person into some concept, whether or not it's a soul, whether or not it's just the past, whether or not it's their energy. Again, it depends on what the forebrain of that particular person believes, shifts that concept of that person into a place where the brain is comfortable. There's no more autonomic arousal. There's no motivation.
Andrew Huberman's exploration of the neuroscience of heartbreak extends to its impact on our thought patterns. He reveals that heartbreak can trigger negative thoughts about ourselves, our former partner, and the future. Furthermore, he discusses how rumination, the relentless and obsessive thinking about the breakup, can become a predominant feature of our cognitive processes. Understanding these cognitive shifts is crucial, as it enables us to consciously address and reframe our negative thinking. Recognizing that these thought patterns are common during heartbreak empowers us to actively work towards fostering healthier perspectives.
When there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. If you look at suicides after breakups, those are far more common in younger people than they are in older people. Why? Because the relationship represents the whole future. They have no concept that they know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down. In breakups, what's happened is the person is no longer available in time and space. This is why when someone breaks up, you literally have to let them go, right? Constant pursuing of them is out of context, is not healthy. They have a name for that. It's called a stalker. Don't do it. But it's almost as if the brain has to think that the person is gone in time and space. This has become much harder with social media, right? Because people can check up on people, they can hear from people. In the old days, like when I was growing up, you just took the phone off the hook, or you diverted your attention. Now we are constantly renewing that the person is still there. And so love and the loss of love and the death grief are virtually identical. It's that motivational state. And this is why it's so hard to not reach out to somebody that you really miss and want back.
According to Andrew Huberman's enlightening analysis, heartbreak not only affects our emotional and cognitive well-being, but also our physical health. He elucidates how heartbreak can lead to an increase in stress hormones, which in turn weaken our immune system and make us more susceptible to illness. Additionally, heartbreak can impact our heart rate and blood pressure. Understanding these physical health implications prompts us to prioritize self-care during heartbreak, emphasizing the importance of nurturing our overall well-being. It serves as a reminder to engage in activities that promote physical and emotional well-being, such as exercise, relaxation techniques, and seeking professional help when needed.
How comfortable one is feeling their feelings, is male or female, is going to strongly dictate how quickly one moves through grief. This is the same thing as trauma. The more willing someone is to feel the full depth and intensity of the feelings that they associate with that trauma, the more quickly they're going to move through the trauma. Again, I'm lifting from Paul Conti's words, so these aren't mine, but people use a number of strategies. They use distraction. They use states like, they sublimate to things like anger and avoidance of various kinds in order to not feel the traumatic feelings or not feel the breakup. People will, try and self-soothe with alcohol or try and self-soothe with multiple new partners or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't work. It just extends it because this map of space, time, and closeness needs to be fractured. And the only way to do that is for the brain to have to confront the reality, which is that whether by death or by breakup, they are no longer available. It's like the food on the other side of that wall is gone. It's just not there anymore. Or that the food that was accessible, now there's a wall in between and you will not get through it. And you can see this actually in animal studies that are kind of hard. They're actually very hard to watch. You'll see the animal perseverate, literally damage its own body trying to get through a barrier to something it's highly motivated to see. People do that post-breakup. They usually do that by talking to everybody about the breakup, which is its own form of perseverating on the motivation. What did I do? What did I do wrong? This and that. And some of that analysis is healthy, some of it's not. Now, why would one group be more, let's just say, effective at dealing with breakups? It's probably the ability to really feel the full intensity of how sad it is and be able to confront that. And here I'm a male. I've only ever lived in a male body. So all I can tell you is that I think from a very early age, there's an ability that, at least I'm sure it transcends to women too, or extends to women too, but learning to pack down feelings, right? And so what are we really talking about when we're talking about pack down feelings? I'm not a psychologist, but what we learn is top-down control, forebrain to autonomic control. It's the same thing like, I don't want to jump off the high dive, or I don't want to do this public speaking, but I'm gonna kind of like, I'm just gonna force myself, I'm gonna David Goggins it, right? Grief is an autonomic state. We say it has valence, has negative valence, but it's high levels of autonomic arousal with a negative connotation, because you can be high levels of autonomic arousal with happiness, right? You can be very alert and aroused and happy, very alert and aroused and sad. It's very alert and aroused and sad, and yet we learn how to tamp that down. What is tamping down? It's reducing our heart rate. It's going to work each day, being a functional human being. There's a lot of that, rather than allowing ourselves to, sob uncontrollably into a pillow. Some people are better at this. I mean, the late Steve Jobs was a big proponent of scream therapies. Catharsis, cathartic release of internal state that he felt would allow him to return as a happier, nicer person. He was also kind of well known for screaming at people in the office. So he obviously had a lot pent up inside. So I think the better that we can lean into the emotional states that we fear the most, but in a controlled way where we're not harming ourselves or other people, the better. The more that we try and avoid that, and we try and sublimate, or just, and I've done this, so I'm speaking from experience, I would use the anger or the sadness from an experience to just work 10 times longer, 10 times harder, to just get that much more focus. You're taking that autonomic arousal, that narrow aperture and that energy, and you're putting it onto something that moves your life forward. So in some cases that's good, because you still need to function. Here I'll just say, it gave me the illusion that I was working through something, because you get all the accoutrements and rewards of hard work, but what you don't do is remap that space-time closeness map. And then you find, I guarantee, you find yourself 5 or 10 years later wondering why you're so exhausted, or why certain things in life aren't going well. And it's because, when they say you haven't dealt with the loss, you never actually allowed yourself to feel the feelings. But once you do, it's like a valve, it releases. There are times in our life where we feel compelled to take on certain challenges for whatever reason. There's a phrase that doesn't exist in the scientific literature, but it captures two components of physiology that are absolutely factual. Earlier we talked about limbic friction. As it relates to creative process and sublimation of anger and sadness and creating things from bad events, books, music, etc. The words that come to mind are limbic resonance. The human beings resonate with these extreme states. There aren't many great albums written about a good day walking on a Sunday in the park. It's kind of boring. I mean, there's the beautiful painting Sunday in the Park with George, but I'll be honest, it's beautiful, but it's also kind of boring. You can look at the details of it for a while. People like intensity. The Scream is, people look at that for a long time, and it speaks to the psychosis of the artist, etc. People don't generally bond through passive, relaxed states unless they've also been through a lot together.